and welcome to our first of our fall virtual learning series, Career Bootcamp Preparation Series, Mastering Fundamentals. I see we have a lot of people online today. I'm very excited for today's session. So before we begin, um, some things to note. If you could go to the next slide, please. Your microphones and cameras and chats are deactivated for the presentation. We will be using the chat function to send links with you. As we move through today's session, please share your questions by using the Q&A button. You can vote for the questions you like by clicking on the thumbs up button. The session today is offered in English. The French session is going to be taking place after this session, so from 2:30 till 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. As with all of our workshop, this session will be recorded and posted on our YouTube page, so you can go back and check out the recordings and the podcast series at a later date. We would also like to note that the PowerPoint presentation for each session will be also included on our wiki page, as well as all the resources. So you can feel free to check it at a later time as well. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I have a pleasure of joining you from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, and Oji-Cree peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation, today known as Winnipeg. So I'd like to recognize that there are learners who are joining from all around Canada on different lands, and encourage all of you to take a moment to acknowledge the land you're on. My name is Yulia, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today. I'm fairly new to the public service. I've worked in Indigenous Services Canada and the Programs and Partnerships team. I've joined in January, and I come from the Canadian Red Cross. So this topic is also very interesting to me personally as well. And just to recap of what you're going to be learning today, in this session, you will learn quick tips on developing effective resume writing skills to showcase your strengths and qualifications, ensuring your application stands out. You will obtain a high-level understanding of the application process, including tips for tailoring your application to specific roles and departments that are of interest to you. You will enhance your interview techniques by learning tips on how to practice key skills such as answering common standardized questions, demonstrating competencies, and managing nerves on high-stakes situations. And you will identify and utilize career resources to confidently navigate your professional journey, leveraging available tools, networks, and mentorship opportunities. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists we're very fortunate to have with us here today. Rena Gagnon is a senior human resource advisor at the Public Service Commission of Canada, based out of Halifax. She has over 20 years of experience in administration, corrections, alternate dispute resolutions, and human resources. In her current role in the Center of Expertise for Outreach and Engagement, Rena focuses her work on promoting the recruitment of candidates to the public service through meaningful engagement with equity-seeking groups, community organizations, educational institutions, and other government departments. She is also a mother of a teenager, and she spends time trying to decipher Gen Z speak, which she finds generally entertaining. So we're very happy to have you with us, Rena. And our next speaker is Sherry Sholdes. She's spent 8 years at Health Canada as a director, client services, responsible for a team of staffing advisors and assistants supporting 3 client branches with their non-ag staffing. Prior to that, she spent 10.5 years with Western Economic Diversification as a principal human resource consultant, providing her clients with full HR services. She was also the center of expertise in staffing for the department, working closely on corporate files. Sherry holds a Bachelor of Commerce in Human Resources from the University of Alberta and holds a certified HR professional designation. So a lot of knowledge from both of our panelists today. And without further ado, we're going to talk about our first topic, resume tips and tricks. And I will pass it to Sherry. No, I will pass it to Rena. Sorry.
No worries. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to let you know, I am located in Kjipuktuk on the east coast of Canada in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory and ancestral homeland of the Mi'kmaq. For anyone who could benefit from a visual description, I am a woman of Asian heritage with long black hair, brown eyes, black glasses, wearing a black shirt with a floral print. So the first section we have today is resume tips and tricks. So the objective of your resume is to provide enough detailed and relevant information that hiring managers can determine if you meet the requirements of the job. So one tip is really important to keep in mind is that for government applications submitted through the Public Service Resourcing System on GC Jobs, the people reviewing your application will focus on the screening questions as the primary source to determine if you meet the qualifications. Therefore, you should know that your resume is a secondary source of information. My advice at this point would be to establish the bones of your CV, have a few versions of it, for example, a private sector CV versus public service, and tailor it to each selection process. But screening questions should be your main focus. More on that later when we cover the application process. So things to include on your resume. It might seem obvious, but your name and contact information are very important. An email address is imperative as most communication is completed through email. I strongly suggest you provide a professional email address. I once received a resume from someone whose email address started off with yellowpowerranger@gmail.com. While there isn't anything technically wrong with it, something a little more professional would be better. I myself have one email account for personal use and one for professional. So if you choose to do this, please ensure you check frequently both emails, including the junk and spam folders. When you include your education, work, or volunteer experience, if you use chronological timeline, be sure to include the dates. This will help those screening your application, especially if any qualifications needed specify recent or significant experience gained consecutively over a minimum number of years. Another tip would be if you have SLE results, please add them, including expiration dates, if applicable. This will help screeners determine if you need to be scheduled for SLE testing. If professional experience is limited, emphasize volunteer work, internships, or involvement in community activities. Show how these experiences help develop relevant skills like leadership or project management. Government positions value community involvement, and volunteering can be viewed as relevant experience. Next slide, please. So with your resume, it's important to keep it concise. The industry standard, keep in mind, for private sector is 2 pages, but for government, we have some leeway since the focus is primarily on screening questions. But even though you have wiggle room on the length, it is important to ensure your resume is concise enough to focus on your relevant experience. For applications through GC Jobs on PSRS, you should remove any formatting as your resume is uploaded in plain text. That is to say, don't waste your time making a pretty resume with extra fonts or pictures, as it will all be reduced to plain text. A clean, structured format for your resume is best. Really avoid long, drawn-out paragraphs, and if you can, use bullet points. If you're sending your resume to someone, always send it in a PDF format to ensure consistency. However, be prepared to have your resume available in different formats if requested. A really good tip is spell check. Proofread for spelling and grammar. Government resumes need to be professional and error-free. Another pro tip, get someone to read your resume. A fresh set of eyes can tell you if there are mistakes and let you know if your resume is easily understandable. Quantify your achievements is also something that you could do. For example, increased engagement in community programs by 30%, or I handled client inquiries by 50 inquiries per day. Numbers catch attention and give a clearer picture of your contributions. Also on your resume, focus on your transferable skills, also known as competencies. Highlight skills that are applicable across different roles, such as communication, teamwork, and problem solving and adaptability. Emphasize how these skills can contribute to the goals of government service. And when you're describing these goals and how you did these skills, use action verbs to describe your skills: collaborated, facilitated, managed. And as well, include continuous learning. This demonstrates your willingness to learn new or update current skills. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do here was a little bit of myth busting with resumes. And some things to avoid. So a true myth, a computer will screen your application and resume. So this is not true. Screening is completely manual by humans, and no computer picks up on keywords. Another myth, your resume should include every job you have ever had in your lifetime since high school. You don't need to list every job that you have ever had unless they relate to the job you are applying for. This is where having multiple versions of your resume in your toolbox is very helpful. I have, for example, one CV that is an exhaustive list of my employment history on one resume, but I adapt different versions according to the job that I am applying for. Another myth is that employment gaps are generally looked on as a bad thing. It's not. It is important to be open and honest about them if asked. And of course, there are usual situations why there would be a gap, such as parental leave or a leave of absence to travel. If your gaps really bother you, you can bring less attention to it by just using years in your chronological order or find a format of your CV that suits. Highlight skills or experience that you gained during that time, and you can make it clear that you're ready to return to work. It is all about being confident, transparent, and owning the narrative surrounding your work history and your experiences. So things to avoid on your resume: avoid slang and acronyms. Your resume should be clearly understood by anybody that reads it. This is where, if you give it to somebody else to read, they could tell you whether or not they understand what you're saying. And another key thing to avoid is exaggerating or lying on your resume. Be honest, and that way it's easier to speak to your experiences on your resume. And that is resumes. So over to Sherry for the application process.
Thank you so much, Frenna. Very helpful. So I'll take it from here with the next step. When you apply to a federal government process, it is all online. And typically you will be asked to respond to screening questions. But before we get to that, I'll talk a little bit about the process. You're in the website and you see a job advertisement that grabs your attention. So the first thing that you will want to do upon just skimming the advertisement, if you're interested in applying, you should make sure that you're eligible to apply. So what that means is you'll want to take a look at the area of selection. Oftentimes you'll see a posting that might only be open to the employees of that specific department where the vacancy exists. So if it's open to Transport Canada, I work at Health Canada, I can't apply. But I should as an applicant, take a look, because sometimes there's what's called a sliding area of selection, where they might say if there are not a sufficient number of applicants from within Transport Canada, employees of the Government of Canada may apply. So just pay special attention to who it is specifically open to. You'll want to also understand what the intent of the process is. So there's typically a little paragraph there that might indicate how many vacancies. Could be 1, 2, 3 from the get-go. They'll also indicate if they're looking to create a pool of qualified candidates. So that's just good to know as well, what the intent is of the process. If you see the word anticipatory on there, what that means is they don't necessarily have a vacancy right now, but they want to go through running a process, getting a pool established for down the road when they anticipate that somebody will be leaving, let's say a retirement. So that's what anticipatory means. You'll want to review the essential qualifications. So here is where you'll look at what education level they're looking at and what they have indicated under the experience criteria. You don't want to spend time applying to something if you don't meet something. So if they're asking for a specific level of education and you don't meet it, you will get screened out. If they have 4 experience factors listed under essential and you may meet 3 of them, but not that 4th, I would advise that you not apply, because you would absolutely have to meet all of the essentials in order to move forward in the process. Asset qualifications are what I like to call the nice to haves. You don't necessarily have to have them, any or all of them, in order to progress in the process. But certainly if there are any that you meet, you should apply and then indicate how you meet them. When demonstrating your experience, we do recommend using the STAR method. Rena will go through this in a little more detail when she's talking about preparing for an interview, but what the acronym stands for is situation, task, action, results. So I mentioned earlier that there will be screening questions you will likely need to respond to. These will be in relation to the education and the experience criteria that you need to where you need to indicate how you meet. And so in doing so and wanting to have clear, concise responses to the questions, you want to state what the situation was of a specific example you want to talk about, what the task at hand was, how you took action, and what the result was. Some key tips for success: you want to pay attention to keywords. You want to address the criteria, what is in the posting, and of course, submit a complete application. And you want to ensure that your application meets the needs and the qualifications for the job that you're interested in, which I've already covered. So next slide. So things to consider, other things to consider when you're applying. There will always be a language profile. You're going to find either English Essential, you'll find bilingual, you may find various linguistic profiles. In particular, where they're looking to create a pool. If it's bilingual, you may see a variety of linguistic profiles such as BBB or CBC. You might see imperative versus non-imperative. So these are all some different sorts of words and language you might see when you're taking a look at the language. You may apply even if you don't have second language evaluation results, but do know that if it is a bilingual process, you will be tested somewhere along the process. Knowledge, abilities, personal suitability. So these are different criteria that will be assessed either through a written assignment or through an interview or reference checks. If you see these on the poster, you likely will. Don't feel that you need to include them in your resume or in your responses to the screening questions. These are assessed later on in the process. Operational requirements, conditions of employment. So what you might see here is willingness and ability to travel, willingness and ability to work overtime. So just take a look at those, and before you apply, really ask yourself, am I able to travel if I must? Am I able to work overtime? So that's just something to keep an eye on in terms of expectations. The clearance process, this covers off security clearance. Again, part of the process that takes place a little further along if you're chosen as a qualified candidate. So this isn't something you necessarily have to worry about while you're applying, but you should see on the poster whether they're looking for a reliability or a secret level clearance. And you'll always see a contact name and number on the poster. Typically, it's an HR advisor. It might be the hiring manager. Take advantage of that if you ever have any questions on the process, on the poster, and on the job vacancy in general, contact that individual. And under the challenge here, it indicates check out alternative ways of finding job opportunities like LinkedIn or GC Facebook groups. I could speak to the GC Facebook groups. They are very active. There are several groups for Government of Canada on Facebook. You can find one for probably any sort of group and category that you're interested in taking a look at. I'll say administration, clerical, executive, human resources. There is a group out there. They can be a little overwhelming. Like I said, they're very busy, but I have used them myself when I'm looking for someone to hire. And I can see individuals having quite a bit of success and, posting what they're interested in, and hiring managers will take a look and will contact those individuals that they'd like to see their resumes for. Yeah, no, you can flip to the next slide there. So you've decided, okay, I've skimmed, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to apply for this job. So some important elements to consider. You will want to follow the instructions on the advertisement. I always recommend reading the job posting from top to bottom. There is a lot of information there, but it's very helpful information. Once you start working on the online application form there as well, you just want to follow along quickly, or follow along, ensuring that you read all of the details so that you don't miss anything. You want to understand the staffing terms. What do they mean, as well as the terminology in the job poster. So an example might be, okay, I see that they're intending to use this process for an assignment. What's an assignment versus a secondment? What's a deployment? So you will want to look up and find more information on what all of that means so that you understand it well. Of course, it goes without saying, submit before the deadline. I like to recommend that you leave yourself a lot of time to apply. It might seem like it's going to be pretty quick for you, but when you get into the nitty-gritty of responding to those screening questions, it actually takes quite a bit of time to do it well. I know for myself in the past, I could have spent up to 15 hours just working on my resume and working on the responses to the screening questions in preparation to apply to something. Submit only what is required. So you'll have a checklist online indicating what it is that you need to submit. Oftentimes it'll say, of course, the screening questions, the resume, could say cover letter. If it doesn't say cover letter, there's no need to cut and paste a cover letter into the field where your resume should go. You want to show that you can follow instructions. Ensure that the information in your cover letter matches your resume. So if you do submit a cover letter, and this also goes in terms of your responses to your screening questions, you want to make sure that what you're talking about in there can be easily mapped to your resume. So I'll say, for example, if I'm answering a question about providing strategic leadership in something, and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I do that in my job now. So I'm indicating in my response, as client or director of client services at Health Canada for the past 8 years, it is my responsibility to and then I start going into my example. The individual screening will want to be able to look at the resume and say, okay, yeah, I see from 2016 on, she's been working at Health Canada. If I'm going, using or referring to older experience, okay, my former department where I was for 10.5 years, and I was a staffing advisor, and this is when I did this, They want to be able to go, yep, she was there 10.5 years, this all maps out. Be clear and precise. I noticed one of the top questions here that was asked just before I started speaking was about word count for responding to the screening questions. I'm probably a terrible person to ask this because I tend to be quite wordy. Sometimes you will find that they'll give you a word limit, which for me is my worst nightmare because I find it difficult, but we do encourage you to be clear and concise. I suppose for myself, I like to give a lot of detail. In my head, I'm always thinking, make it hard for them to screen you out. So as long as you're not rambling on, it makes sense. You just want to get that detail in there so that you know for sure that they can see that you meet. And then accommodations are there to help you. So this is some important information that you would find on the poster if you require any accommodations for the application process and into your interviews, you can reach out. And so that said, I'll take my application hat off and put the interview hat on. So you've been screened into the interview, which is wonderful news. So it's the next step. And I find that that's super exciting. It takes a lot of work to go through the application process. So once you're in there, then you get to prepare in a whole different way. So you will typically receive an email with an invitation to the interview. So again, you're going to want to read that from top to bottom. There is typically a lot of detail in there, and you just don't want to miss anything. So review it. Take note of what they're going to assess, because the interview might not necessarily assess all of the competencies that are listed on the poster. It might just assess 3 of the 5 that are listed. Perhaps the other 2 are going to be assessed through a reference check. So take a look and make sure, okay, they're going to be assessing these 3. Perfect. So this is where it starts to turn a little bit mental, and you want to start thinking about past examples. Of course, it's very difficult to know what are they going to ask, but you can prepare yourself in such a way that you're not going to be too caught off guard. Oftentimes what you'll find is you're going to get some time with those interview questions before you head into the actual interview. Often we'll give about 30 minutes for the candidates to sit with those questions. I find, I often joke that that's your 30 minutes to sit in a room with no one around where you can freak out a little bit, because nerves are high and you might sit there and think, okay, gosh, what's an example here? If you've done some of that prep beforehand, your examples will come quickly. And then think about how you can apply that STAR method. Again, Rena will go through that in a little more detail. Practice, refine, practice again. For me, when I have my examples, I go through it in my head and I kind of pretend, okay, if they ask me something about this, how would I lay it out? You'll want to prepare a question or 2 to ask the selection board afterwards. It's always a good form to do that. So ask them about what it is they're looking for in a candidate. Ask them more details about the job, because in an interview, you also need to be sold on it as well. You want to make sure that it's a right fit for you. And then you yourself can determine how best to set yourself up for success. That might be dressing professionally, good body language, good posture, and also just ensuring you get a good night's sleep. And of course, those deep breaths before you go in there. And I'll hand it off. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. So we're going to talk about the STAR method, which is a good way to craft your answers. So the STAR stands for situation, task, action, and results. So describe the situation in detail and give enough context so the board understands the situation and your role within it. For task, it is important that you outline your tasks and what you would do in the situation. So in this case, you would avoid the use of the words we, us, or anything that implies a group effort. Action would be describe the actions that you took specifically from your point of view, again, not from the group. And the result, how did the situation end? Was it the expected result? So an example would be if the board asked, can you tell me a time when you managed a difficult project? So using the STAR method, I would say the situation. In my previous role as project manager at so-and-so department, we were tasked with launching a new product within a very tight deadline of 3 months. The project was critical for our company's quarterly goals, but we faced several challenges, including limited resources and a small team. So I get the background, we see the challenge, and we see the situation. So the task. My responsibility was to ensure the project stayed on track, met all deadlines, and was delivered successfully despite the constraints. So what was the action I took? I started by breaking down the project into smaller, manageable tasks and created a detailed project plan. I held daily stand-up meetings with my team to monitor progress and address any issues promptly. I also identified key team members' strengths and delegated tasks accordingly to maximize efficiency. Additionally, I communicated regularly with stakeholders to keep them informed and manage their expectations. And then sum it up with the results. As a result of these efforts, we successfully launched the product on time and exceeded our initial sales targets by 20%. The project was praised by senior management, and our team received recognition for our hard work and effective collaboration. So in this example, this demonstrates how you can use the STAR method to structure your response, providing a clear and concise narrative that highlights your problem-solving skills and achievements. Don't be afraid to sell yourself. Tell them what you did and if you learned anything from the situation. Would you do anything differently? This shows that you're able to learn from past situations and apply them to future situations. Next slide, please. So preparation, as Sherry said, is key. Don't leave your preparation until the night before. And you must practice your answers. You could start off by writing them down on paper, getting an idea of the situation that you want to give, and then practice reciting it. Don't be afraid to enlist a friend to ask you questions for a mock interview. It might be uncomfortable for a little bit, but it's also someone you could bounce your answers off of and brainstorm on potential questions you may receive. And one tip I have is recording yourself can be extremely helpful. Seeing yourself may be awkward, but sometimes the video will show you things that you do that you are not aware of. For example, I've recorded myself and I've noticed some twitching, maybe some hair twirling. Like these are things that you might not be aware of that you do, but a recording can help you discover. And during the interview, be mindful that it is not a race. You can take your time, feel free to write down notes. You will often be provided with pen and paper, but it is always good to practice to bring your own if necessary. Drink when you need to, if there's water on the table, and jot down some of your own notes or write down the question. And with public service interviews, the interviewers may be jotting down notes while you talk. So this is completely normal, and don't be intimidated if they don't look at you much. That being said, you should be mindful of how fast you are speaking. Speak clearly and slow enough so that the board can write your answer and your response without being rushed. And again, don't be afraid to ask them to repeat a question or revisit the question later. Just be sure to make note of the time so you have enough time to answer all questions. And at the end of the interview, they may ask you if you have any questions. And if you have any, ask. It shows you are genuinely interested in the position, and it is the time to get the answers to any burning questions you may have, like what the next steps are in the process, or when you should expect to hear about results, or your questions on how the team is structured. Interviews do get easier with time. You just trust the process, I promise. And that is interview techniques.
Thank you so much, Rena and Sherry, for this great presentation. I sure took a lot of notes about my resumes and what changes I need to make as well. So before we move on to the Q&A section, I would like to take the opportunity to share a variety of helpful career resources with all of you. So the links that you see on the screen, there will also be shared with you in the wraparound email post the event. And these links are great if you would like to learn about the application process, finding a mentor, and even learning how to network. So just a reminder, we're going to be, the panelists will be answering the Q&A section. So please put thumbs up to questions that you would like to be answered. Okay. So the first question, and I think Rena, you kind of spoke about it a bit, but um, the question is, how can I highlight my transferable skills, especially if I have limited experience directly related to the job?
I think for that transferable skills, we really need to think outside the box if you don't have a lot of job related experience managing a group, for example, in university counts. It shows your transferable skills there. If you have any community and volunteer work, those are also very important. Any extracurriculars that you do, for example, I volunteer with my daughter's dance competition, so a fundraising team. So those are the kinds of things that if you don't have a lot of experience, job experience, that you could highlight your transferable skills there. So you could have them in your job experience section, but you could also have it under extracurriculars or volunteer experience as well. And you can see it as a progression throughout your entire resume. I don't know if Sherry has something to add, but that's my suggestion.
Nope, nothing to add. That's great.
Thank you. That's great. And next question, I think it's a bit of a challenging question, so maybe both Sherry and Rena could your thoughts about any tips to increase the chances of finding opportunities during the current hiring freeze. What we hear is that most departments are not hiring. So any suggestions and thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, that it's a tough one. I mean, I did this a presentation similar to this in the spring and again in the summer, and like each time I do it, like the landscape seems to change more and more. Certainly right now is a tricky time. There's no doubt about that. But I would say I would give the same advice here as I give to the individuals on my team, is make yourself, especially if I'd say, for example, if you're a term right now and feeling a little bit vulnerable, ensure that you're keeping yourself very busy and that you're keeping yourself giving yourself exposure. There's always opportunities to put your hand up for something, and that might lead you into perhaps moving to another space. I'd say in HR, where we have a variety of disciplines, and if an opportunity comes up, maybe not in staffing, but elsewhere, perhaps it's not your first choice, but it's an opportunity to go learn. It's an opportunity to build another skill, to build your resume. So just being willing to put your hand up and take on an extra project just to get a little more exposure. I haven't been on the Facebook groups in quite some time because I haven't been looking to fill any positions. So I don't know how active they are, but certainly just keep that resume brushed off, ready to go, so that if something does come up in a site like that, you can put your hand up and say, yes, I'm interested, and your resume is ready to be sent off. Rena, I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
And just a couple things I think of. Just to add to that, networking is absolutely key. So going to LinkedIn, seeing the local events where people might be meeting, youth groups meet. Sometimes there are groups like Public Service Pride Network. They do some events. Go to the events, join, meet people. Meet people is key. One thing I forgot to mention in the resume section is that if you've been successful in a pool, put that on your resume. That is something that can be leveraged to find a position at that level. If you're not at that level, but you've made a pool, say to this manager, I met this experience, I'm qualified in this pool. This is the department, this is selection process number, and they can look into whether or not that could be leveraged to get you a position. So just, I also like to tell people the climate is unnerving right now. It's a little bit worrisome, but try not to worry. This is the government of Canada. We're not going anywhere. There's always going to be government jobs. It's just a matter of being resilient and sticking to, your work ethic and keep searching for those jobs and opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you both. And Sherry, I think you've spoke a little bit about the GC Facebook groups. So the next question is about that. For GC Facebook groups or GC Connect job postings, why and how people are able to hire from these groups?
Yeah, it's very loose in there. It's kind of like a bit of a networking opportunity for uh individuals, so managers, for example, to find somebody to fill in the gaps. The key with it is, as a hiring manager, you can only find someone for an at-level opportunity. So I wouldn't be able to go in there, and I've only ever used it for temporary. So where I've needed someone to come in at a level that they're already at, which may end up being then a secondment over from another department. If I'm looking for, let's say, a PE3 position and I have PE1s putting their hands up, I'm interested, I can't really touch that without doing a non-advertised. But it's more for temporary at level. I'm not saying it hasn't led to something maybe more permanent, but us in the HR world have been very clear with what we can use it for, because of course, when you're advertising a job, it needs to be on jobs.gc.ca. So this is just for temporary.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know that, so that's great even for me to know. For Rene, could you provide some examples of responses to questions about teamwork, problem solving, or leadership during government interviews?
Specific examples? Is that the question? Or
Sorry. Yeah, if you could provide some responses to questions about teamwork, problem solving, or leadership.
okay. So if you get a question to do with problem solving and teamwork, really have a look at your job and think about who you worked with and what your role was. And it doesn't have to be anything earth shattering, right? Like it doesn't have to be something like a major 6 month project. All you have to do is demonstrate that you're able to work in a team. So think about, I don't know, planning a retreat with another admin and another unit. Say the directorate wants to meet together for a meeting. What steps did you take? Who did you ask the questions? What were the logistics? Think of who was invited and what you did to process that. How did it work out in the end? How much lead time did you need? It doesn't have to be anything major astronomically and huge. Like people think that screening questions must be very, fancy and extravagant. It really doesn't. It can be very simple. And all it has to do is demonstrate. So describe the tasks and the situation, what you did, and that should be enough. Problem solving, you do it every day. You don't have to think of something that was like a huge conflict that you solved for the president or the deputy minister. Like it's, your boss is on travel status and they couldn't find the agenda. What did you do? You couldn't find it in your email, so you had to contact the federal counsel who was doing the meeting and ask, is there agenda? Can you forward it this way? Like it doesn't have to be earth shattering. It doesn't have to be major, as long as it describes everything. One thing that really helps is that if you write out your answer and, for example, talk to your coworker in the team and say, does this make sense? And they'll tell you if it does or if it doesn't, if it's not clear. So that's where I find a lot of the situations are that people feel their answer isn't good enough because they don't know if it's clear enough. You really should bounce it off of someone to see if it makes sense. Because the board is just going to write down exactly what you say. And if they're writing and you think, oh, it's good enough, it's great, they're not going to indicate one way or another if your answer is good. They're just writing down exactly what you say and they're going to assess what you say. So it's up to you to make sure that it's clear and it answers that question.
Thank you. And I think the next question, you kind of already mentioned some about it. So is repetition a good or a bad thing if some people have to repeat the question, how do they reward it to avoid saying the same or the same thing to multiple questions?
I've gotten this question a lot. It's not bad to use the same answer. I would tend to not, just because it just shows one side of your employment experience, right? There's got to be another situation. So just make sure the situation you're giving for a question accurately depicts that one. There may be another situation somewhere that could answer the question. So it's not absolutely wrong to repeat it if you can't think of one. But this is where the preparation comes in. So if you're doing it in advance, you'll be able to pick out which job showcases which competency better. And a good tip would be to, when you're answering these screening questions, is to keep them in a Word document so that when you answer the next application process, you already have something. You can tweak it a little bit, you can change it, but the bulk of it is there. So myself, having 20 years experience in government, my screening question document is quite large, but you could see the progression of the competencies as they go along through the years. When I was a clerk, when I was an assistant, when I was a supervisor, and now senior advisor, you could see the competencies are changing and growing. But I mean, the situations still apply. So really that bank of screening questions, if you save them, it will get easier in time. Writing them out is one thing, and then projecting it and answering it in an interview is also different. So again, it's practice, 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 and keep records of everything. I don't know, Sherry, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I did have my hand up, but you took the words out of my mouth. It's that the preparation. No, it's great. The preparation is key, because I mentioned in one of the slides that you will very likely get 30 minutes with your questions before the interview. There have been several times I've gone in and thought, oh, this one example that I thought I would use for this competency, oh, is perfect over here. Oh no, what do I use over here? So that's why I always have a couple in my head. And if we're thinking about teamwork, think of an example of where teamwork went really well, and think of an example where it didn't go so well, because you never know what type of question they're going to ask. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of reiterate that preparation. And you're right, Rena, like my library is getting bigger and bigger, but when you start applying to jobs that are kind of within the same discipline, same kind of group and level, they start sounding very similar. You might get 3 out of the 4 experience factors the same as you kind of move along to different postings. And it's like, I apply to this one, you go, you grab your answers, and you just kind of tweak them. So once you build that catalog, applying is much less painful.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And Sherry, maybe you could answer this question. Do you have any tips for casual government employees to secure a more permanent position, since they do not have access to internal postings?
Yeah, I'd say I'm going to go back to Rena's response to one of the previous questions in terms of the networking. That's just going to be key, networking within your departments. You know, having your resume at the ready. The networking is very important, because in HR, we tend to get unsolicited resumes coming across our desk because someone is doing the networking, right? Someone is just finding that key person that might want to share it within their network type thing. And so then for us, because we're supporting 3 branches within Health Canada in staffing their positions, if I get something for someone working in a lab, for example, well, I'm not personally hiring someone working in a lab on my team, but I have clients that do. So then I know to share it with them. So that's probably the number one tip. Having really frank discussions with your manager as well, being open to them, like that I want to stay, I'm enjoying this, could you help me market myself a little bit? That's going to be key too. You have to be vocal about it. You can't just kind of sit back and think the opportunities are going to fall into your lap. You have to go out and seek them out, and the main way to do that is having the conversations.
Thank you. And maybe one of you could take this questions. Could you briefly explain how do pools work? Like how does a pool work for someone who doesn't know or new to the government?
I can grab that. So, yeah, qualified pools are very different for individuals who are used to applying to private sector processes. Within the federal government, it takes a lot of time to run a process. It could take up to a year. We're not always proud of that, but it happens. It's, they're very rigorous. And so when we put all of that time and energy into a process, we don't want it to be just to hire one person. We want to have the ability to go back to the process results and be able to fill multiple positions. And so what the goal is of most processes is to put everyone through the process in its entirety. I mean, those who meet every stage along the way. And if we can end up with a pool of 5 to 8 individuals, that is a successful process. We might just have one vacancy and we make our decision of who that one person is going to be, but then the 7 others remain in that pool. The pool could be used just within that unit where that it was created for, or it could be shared within the department. Heck, pools can be shared within or between or amongst departments as well. So it's a way to just go through the process, be found qualified, end up in a pool, get that letter that Rena has already indicated that you can leverage. And when you're marketing yourself, you can say, hey, I'm in these pools. And that is kind of a golden ticket in a way, because some departments, some managers don't have time to run a process. So if they can just have a quick meet and greet with someone who's in a pool, decide if they're going to be a fit, then it's a lot less work for them to make that hire based on the person already having been found qualified. I don't know if you have anything to add, Rena.
I think just to clarify, because some people are newer to the government, they don't understand that an inventory is not a pool.
Right.
So an inventory is completely different. So if someone is in an inventory, let's be clear that you said you meet everything and you're included in the inventory, you may still be assessed if you're pulled from that inventory. So let's just make that differentiation. Okay. So pools, you've been assessed, you meet. An inventory, you're in a bigger pool of people, called an inventory, where you may need to be assessed on the qualifications for the position. So the chances of getting pulled from an inventory are a little slimmer. A pool is a little more definitive that you have a chance. Inventory is more of a shot in the dark. That being said, there are lots of inventories out there on GC Jobs. There are a ton of them. Actually, I looked the other day. Don't be afraid to apply for those too. You never know when an inventory is going to be used, so it's worth a shot.
Thank you. Yeah, and we have so many questions. Apologies for the learners. We won't be able to answer everything. For our last question, so if you are offered a job and are no longer interested in the position, how do you show that you are grateful for the opportunity without seeming like you wasted the interviewer's time in the process? And it can be both Rena or Sherry.
I can start. I mean, first of all, be honest and don't stall. That is one of the major pet peeves when I worked in staffing, is when I try and contact the candidate and for some reason I can't get a hold of them. It's been 2 days, 3 days. That is also, you need to be respectful of the time of the selection board. So all you can say is, I'm sorry, I'm no longer interested. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. If there's anything in the future you feel like I may be qualified for, please get in touch. However, I have a different path I'm looking at this time. Like, be completely honest. Like, that is it. And I really stress the not stalling thing. It happens a lot.
Yeah, I would agree. It's difficult. Like I mentioned before, these processes take a lot of time and effort. Some positions are really difficult to staff. And so we are dealing with a really small kind of pool of candidates. I mean, going back to, it happens, I get it, we all get it. I think, everyone has a right to go through a process and to be found qualified and to have that experience and whatnot, but oh boy, if I were to pull a story from the past where I had this happen, it was, yes, a very difficult position to fill. I had multiple failed attempts. I desperately needed to fill this one. It required a secret level security. It took 2 months to get my candidates screened. I was looking so forward to finally filling it. And the offer letter was in this person's hands. And I got the call the next morning. Oh, I just got a counter offer. And I just thought it was the way it kind of fell into place. It was like this person was waiting for that letter so that she could say, Kate, here, I got the qualified letter. I was devastated. I lost so much time. So just again, life happens, things happen. Sometimes you might get a promotion or a counter offer or this or that, but it's just be mindful of the time that is being put into it by the hiring committee. And as soon as you know, like, okay, I don't think I'm going to be able to grab this one, especially if it's like a secondment where you need permission to come over. It is appreciated if you could let us know. No one's going to be mad or blacklist you or anything like that, but just be mindful of the time it's taking for us to run through the process and find someone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for both of you for this thoughtful responses. I did learn a lot, and I'll make sure to check our YouTube page for the recordings. So this concludes our Q&A section. We hope that by now you were able to get some tips on how to develop your resume and showcase your strengths and qualifications, that you obtained a high-level understanding of the application process, including some great tips that Sherry and Rena shared with us, and about enhancing your interview skills, and identified some resources to navigate your professional journey. So we have one polling question for you. You should be able to see it on your screen soon. If you could please participate. Right. I think it's on now. So thank you for joining us today. This concludes our first session of our virtual learning series. If you want to learn more, you make sure to sign up for the next session on December 3rd. And as a reminder, our career bootcamp is happening in January. If you haven't registered yet, there are links posted in the chat, so make sure to register, because there you can get even more knowledge on how to build your careers, how to navigate difficult conversations, and there will also be networking opportunities with public servants across the country. So don't miss out this opportunity. Resources, all our resources are available to you on our wiki page as well. And a big thank you to our panelists and all our learners who continue to take their career in their own hands and take the time to invest in their future selves. We will see you all again soon, and we thank you for your continued support for the Federal Youth Network. Take care for now.